You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 5th of February 2025 on Monocle Radio.
US President Donald Trump threatens the fifth invasion of his 2 weeks back in the White House. Afghanistan becomes an even more miserable place for its women. And what would Eurovision be like without all the glitz, joy and arch-knowing camp? Russia is going to show us. I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. My guests Terry Stiasny and Kate Clark will discuss today's big stories, and we'll hear from the founder of the Japan Foundation touring film programme as its UK tour gets underway. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller, and I am joined today by Terry Stiasny, the author and political journalist, and Kate Clark, former BBC correspondent, currently co-director of the Afghanistan Analysts Network. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Terry, first of all, we have described you there as an author and political journalist. You are presently, well, not right now, obviously you're here, but you are doing authoring, and you are at that bit of the authoring process at which you're thinking, oh my God, I'm nearly finished, but do I really want to do this?
Yes, this is one of the really scary moments when it's starting to look like a real book. I'm having to go through and look for all the mistakes I've made, and I will probably think I've spotted all of them until I actually see a finished copy, and then I'll find a whole load more that I haven't seen yet. And then the worst part, which is asking other people to read it, and then come and tell you what they think about it. And so you're sending off emails going, would you enjoy reading this? And hoping people say no.
I've told you, haven't I, how to find a mistake in your own book?
Yes, I think
exactly. Yeah, you wait for the first box of first editions for listeners who are unfamiliar with this technique. You wait for the first box of first editions to arrive on your doorstep. You lift one from the box. You reverently savour a dream realised. Open it to a random page. There it'll be, glaring right at you, having been read 100 times by dozens of people, and yet. I know, it's infuriating. Kate, you have been on not only a stage, but one of the most august/revered stages in London.
I have. I've been singing at the Barbican with my choir, Eclectic Voices.
I mean, this is really properly cool. What were you singing?
We were singing Mozart's Requiem, which listeners may know he left unfinished. And his wife, Constanza, and his pupil finished it for him and forged his signature so that Constanza could get the fee from the Duke. And since then, people have said it's pretty poor. This finishing is pretty poor. But nevertheless, it's a standard version. We were singing a version by a Mozart scholar called Robert Levin. And it's magnificent. It's magnificent.
If you say so yourself.
It was a sold-out performance. Few standing ovations, and it was just, it's the joy, particularly early in the year, in January, when things slightly feel a bit bleak.
And it is a beautiful venue, the Barbican, as well.
Yeah.
That must have been... Is it cool? I'd never been backstage at the Barbican. Is it cool backstage? Is everything sort of elegant and brutalist and minimalist backstage as well?
Yes.
Ugh. I'm incandescent with jealousy.
You can join the choir. You tenor or bass?
I would not hurry to characterise myself as either. I can basically hold a 3-note melody in the key of maybe D on a good day.
Very good.
Does that get us anywhere?
You sound like a guitarist.
Well, technically, but again, I would hesitate to characterise myself, etc. We may be on the verge of drifting from our actual point here, which is, unfortunately, to look at more earthly matters. And to the relief of nobody but Panamanians, Canadians, Mexicans and Greenlanders, US President Donald Trump appears to have fixed his frantically wandering eye on Gaza. Speaking yesterday alongside Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Washington, D.C., Trump spoke vaguely of relocating the entire population, 2 million people, give or take, and building a atop Gaza's ruins a, quote, international unbelievable place. While there would appear to be any number of technical, practical, legal and ethical difficulties with this idea, Trump's Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff chortled that Trump knows real estate. A reminder at this point that Trump is one of very few people to have been bankrupted by a casino that they personally owned. Kate, first of all, how excited are you for the Riviera of the Middle East? Will you be holidaying there?
Well, I worked in the West Bank in 1988, visited Gaza. So it's somewhere that I know reasonably well. And what no one has obviously told Donald Trump is that Palestinians don't leave their land unless they are forced out, which has happened numerous times in the past.
Well, this appears to be the idea.
Yes, exactly. I mean, he's talking about he's sort of talked about voluntary leaving, but actually, if your place has been bombed to smithereens, then there's an issue about what's voluntary and what's not. But I mean, there's so many issues. Where would they go? Who's take them? Yeah, as you say, I didn't have ethnic cleansing and Riviera Resort in Gaza on my bingo card for Trump this year, but...
Terry, he claimed when asked if military intervention might be necessitated that we will do what is necessary, but is US public opinion really likely to be all that agog at the prospect of the Marine Corps splashing ashore on Gaza's beaches?
Well, no, and I think this is what even some Republican representatives have sort of trying to grasp. What on earth does this actually potentially mean? And, some of them already saying, well, I thought we were supposed to be doing America first. I thought we weren't supposed to be doing another intervention. It doesn't sound like it's any kind of thought through idea, let alone a plan. You're not going to somehow recreate Beirut in the 1960s in Gaza in the 2020s. That's just obviously impossible. And it just shows that, for anybody, even people who don't know much about the Middle East have an idea that, basically the question here is who owns the land, who lives in the land, who can go back to their homes on this land. And anything that doesn't really think about that is just, someone talking off the top of their head.
Kate, there is a wider question here, and it is, as always, the question with Trump. It's a version of the question that there always is with Trump, which is how seriously do we take this? But if we think of the last 2 weeks in particular, and a reminder to our listeners, it has only been 2 weeks and a bit, not the 10 years it presently feels like. Are we actually witnessing here a demonstration of power or an impression of it?
It's been an onslaught, hasn't it? And basically, I think the idea is if you drop so many controversial and disruptive policies all at the same time, the media can't follow all of them. The Democratic opposition can't follow all of them. Some will get through. And we've seen already that the courts have stopped some policies because they were illegal. But in my part of the world, in Afghanistan, we've got 50 NGOs closed already. We've got, the UN is the main channel for humanitarian aid to Afghanistan. 60% comes from America. So USAID is closed. USAID has closed. People are panicking. And the thing is, there may be waivers, but everyone has to fill in a form to say why their project is exempted. And of course, all the bureaucrats in DC have been sent home. So it's for a very poor country, basically. So there's going to be problems in Afghanistan, and that's replicated. That's the one I know about.
And there will, of course, we will come to Afghanistan shortly. But yes, as you correctly point out, USAID getting its plugs pulled has horrendous effects all over the world. But to come back to what Trump thinks he's doing, Terry, and we have literally now been talking about this for more than a decade, has anyone learned anything yet about when to take him seriously and when he is just saying stuff? Is there a reliable tell yet?
I think it's quite hard to know because, I mean, as Kate says, there are so many things going on so many fronts. It's almost impossible to get into them. But I think it's quite interesting looking at the international reaction, particularly on Gaza. And I think most countries have done reasonably well not to take the bait too much, but just literally to go back and say, you know, whether you're Turkey or Germany or Jordan or Saudi Arabia, to say, no, this is not the solution. This is not what we are doing. We are talking about two-state solutions, for instance, and not rising to it quite as much as perhaps he hoped.
He has weirdly actually united the world on this one. I am not, as we go to air, I am not aware of a single foreign country which has gone, brilliant, yeah, sounds good.
Israel.
Apart from Israel. And they haven't actually gone all in on this yet. Netanyahu was giving it a bit of side-eye even during the press conference, because even by his standards, this would be a bit out there. But Russia has come out against it. The Saudis have come out very strongly against it. And I would suspect, I think maybe that is somebody that Trump might actually listen to. But just a final thought on this, Kate, and it is a big question, but do US allies in particular now have to start thinking seriously about the prospect of the US just gone properly rogue and how they adjust to that?
Yes, I think so. But they're all really, really cautious. I mean, he does act like a bully and also sort of... getting individual countries in his sights, and everyone else sort of goes into a pack and hopes he doesn't notice them. That's the impression I get. But the thing is, who do you ally yourself with? I mean, there's the EU, there's Britain, there's Canada. No one really said anything in support of Canada, did they? Amongst...
Well, Keir Starmer has just been speaking to Justin Trudeau, and I think in the last day or so he's sort of said, we've talked about, you know, big issues going on and we are there to support Canada. So, you know, I think it does seem that he backs down a bit once you actually say, yes, we'll do the one sort of thing. We know if you're talking about the trade wars, for instance, we'll do one of these things that you want us to do and you can forget about the rest. And he does seem to have backed off on that a little bit.
Well, let us now reflect on a previous American attempt to turn a wreck of a place misruled by theocratic cranks into something perhaps akin to a 51st United State. In Afghanistan, the resurgent Taliban continued to display considerable enterprise in finding as yet unrepressed aspects of female life to repress. The latest casualty of this crusade is Radio Begum, Afghanistan's only radio station run by and for women. Yesterday, Taliban goons raided Radio Begum's premises, seized its equipment and suspended it from broadcasting. For the Taliban, this doubtless counts as a double victory. If there is one thing they dislike more than women, it is a free media. Kate, I think we can get past the sort of wistful conjecture about Taliban 2.0 we heard in the summer of 2021. I mean, I can remember being briefly in Afghanistan during Taliban 1.0 in 1998, and I don't think it was this bad. And it was bad. I mean, it was really grim, especially for women, obviously, but they are banning women's voices in public, etc. The deputy foreign minister has just been chased out of the country for suggesting that maybe girls going to school isn't completely terrible. As far as you were ever able to understand it, or are able to understand it now, what is their own rationale for this? How do they think any of this is helping?
Okay, so they think they came to victory through God's grace.
Righto.
And therefore they have a mandate to rule. The man and there's one person in charge, Mullah Hibatullah, and he's from the most rural, most isolated, most conservative, ultra-conservative bit of the country. So his normal way of life is abnormal for most Afghans, but he is imposing it on everyone else. And even within the Taliban, there's been huge sea changes on issues like girls' education. I mean, we were talking to Taliban, particularly those who've lived outside. You know, if they've lived in Pakistan, in Karachi or the Gulf.
Because that is a difference in that Afghanistan and its people now are not as isolated as they were in 1998, obviously.
And, you know, the neighbours' kids have been going to school, including the girls. So why shouldn't their kids go to school? So there's been a huge change within the Taliban, but that has not filtered into to Hibatullah. and these really extreme, ultra-conservative clerics around him. And those are the people he listens to. So huge discontent about this. We've just been talking to men about what they think about the restrictions on women and girls. The anguish felt by fathers and brothers about the girls in their family, that they can't go to school. Even men whose wives never go out without their faces covered and without a male accompanying them. They didn't go. The mothers didn't go to school, but the fathers want their girls to go to school. And real emotional distress about this. A. B. Why should the state interfere in family life? This is also a huge dishonour for Afghans. You know, you're driving along, you're a man, you've got your wife in the car, the morality police stop you, they interview you, but they also talk to your wife, which is a huge taboo breaking. Yeah. So sometimes we think they're doing really well, the Taliban, they're consolidating their power really well, and then we just think, this can't work. Not in Afghanistan. You can't tell families what to do.
Well, you can only hope not. But is there, Terry, a depressing prospect that at least since 2021 and the United States and allies abandoning Afghanistan in great haste and amid great confusion, that the people that Kate describes at the top of the movement have basically internalised that nobody cares anymore, so we can do what we like?
Well, yes, and I think the danger, there was this idea, as you were suggesting, that, perhaps once they're in power, they will have to engage more with the rest of the world. They will be a bit more realistic. There will be some kind of trade-off potentially. You might get aid in return for being a bit more open to things like education for girls, for instance. And that, despite sort of talks, doesn't really seem to have happened at all. And there does seem to be this, clamping down more and more on what women can do, whether they can do any kind of work. And, particularly, I think what Kate was saying earlier about USAID is really important, because if those NGOs, which were helping to provide, healthcare and employment and education for women to a very limited extent that they could do, if those aren't getting the funding, then those women will be, and girls will be, even more damaged. And, if you miss out your education once, you're not going to get it back. If you're a 10-year-old girl now, what happens in the next 10 years is going to determine the rest of your life.
I mean, Kate, is there practical... I mean, I think we can probably assume that for at least the next 4 years it's going to be very hard to get the United States to take an interest in this. But if there was anything that anybody did feel minded to do, one assumes, short of invading Afghanistan all over again and chasing the Taliban back up into the hills, is there actually anything anybody can do?
Well, I think it's going to be up to Afghans this time, because the foreigners have tried and failed to sort the country out, failed really badly. And as you said, mostly, I don't think the superpower's going to be interested again. There are some people in the new administration who are really hardline on the Taliban, like Marco Rubio, the new Secretary of State. They want to push the Taliban even harder, cut aid even further. So I think there could be that sort of action.
But doesn't that, as such punishments often do, this doesn't end up hurting the regime, it ends up hurting the people?
Yeah, but I think that whatever's been tried in the last 4 years, whether that's carrots or the threat of sticks, just hasn't had any impact on the supreme leader. I mean, he's just adamant that what he's doing is God's law on earth, and that's what he has to do. And that's a really dangerous.
Well,
it just makes it difficult for negotiations, for diplomacy, for the normal ways of trying to cajole or threaten someone.
I just wanted one final thought, Kate, before we move off this, because it is something that various people who know Afghanistan well or worked there a long time and came to know it well have suggested in conversations I've had with them, that if the United States and its allies had wanted to at least hold Kabul and maybe a small amount of area around it as a kind of haven, this is the sort of West Berlin scenario, I guess you might think of it as, that they could have done it more or less as long as they liked. Kabul itself was actually very defendable if you have air supremacy over a besieging enemy, etc., etc., etc. does that parallel universe sound plausible to you, in which, you know, the US had said, we will keep this? I mean, we have permanent military bases all over the world. We will keep Bagram, we will keep Kabul, and we will protect the people who want our protection.
Yeah, I think the problem is that Trump decided on an unconditional withdrawal. So if
But
you look at
Biden didn't have to go through with it.
He almost really did. He had very few troops on the ground left. So, and he extended the deadline before pulling out. I don't know. I mean, the USSR, when they withdrew in the 80s, they spent 3 years building up the Afghan government, their allies. What did Trump do? He just discouraged the Afghan government every turn, bolstered the Taliban. I mean, things like forcing the Afghan government to release Taliban prisoners, 5,000. Or they would cut aid. I mean, this sort of thing. So sure, I mean, it was a choice to leave. America could have stayed there for 100 years if it wanted to, but it had decided not to.
Well, to Russia now, which appears perversely determined to roll back one of the few benefits of its lunatic rampage in Ukraine, i.e. the shortening of the Eurovision Song Contest by the length of one entry, i.e. Russia's, after Russia was bounced out of the transcontinental warbling tournament for the obvious reasons. President Vladimir Putin has now personally signed a decree mandating a terrible vengeance, specifically something called Intervision, a rival song contest controlled by the Kremlin. Literally, Deputy Prime Minister Dmitry Chernyshchenko has been tasked with organising it. From the name down, Intervision is explicitly a resurrection of the Soviet-era song contest which occurred on and off during the Cold War. And we do have an example of what that sounded like. This is the winning entry from 1980, which interestingly, and I use the word interestingly advisedly, was fielded by Finland.
Hyvästi yön, näen valon taivaan. Hyvästi yön, hän sai sen aikaan.
We still do not have that gong in here that I've been asking for years for moments just such as that. So I'm going to have to ask listeners to imagine that I have just gonged it resoundingly off. Terry, will you be tuning in for this?
I'll have to find out how you tune. I think
I'm not sure how possible that's going to be, but in theory,
I would quite like to see. I like there's this idea that sort of the Kremlin would directly control it, and I'm sure they could do that if they wanted to. But if you look back at the history of like the previous Intervision competition, it did tend to fall apart because of partly the way Russia behaved. Well, not only the songs, but it's like the Czechs sort of suddenly, after they were invaded, they really, really didn't want to be running this song competition anymore, after Czechoslovakia was invaded in 1968. And I would quite like them to set it up and then just to have other countries enter and absolutely take the mickey of it in the way that sort of Eurovision has turned into. And maybe it would be, become some kind of weird subversive international song competition. Are
you volunteering, Terry, to go to Moscow and perform something subversive in front of Vladimir Putin?
It would be, will you come get me?
Well, exactly. I would ask for a ground floor room in your hotel. That song we played, interestingly, I think, Kate, may be sort of a preview of what we are in for here, because that was all very wholesome and folky.
Do you know what the Finnish means? That seemed to be the main word in that song.
I don't, actually.
No.
Was it Rusky Go Home?
Don't know. So I've got two questions. One, will you be able to participate in both?
I wouldn't have thought so.
Okay.
I don't know.
And my
that's
second
a
question
whole can
is,
of worms.
would anyone trust the voting system, given the history of Russian democracy?
Well, that's also a reasonable question. But what I wonder about is how they are going to do anything to rival Eurovision without, as Terry alluded to, any acknowledgement of what Eurovision has become. Because back in the 1980s, yes, you probably did have wholesome people singing wholesome folky tunes. That's not Eurovision anymore. They're going to try and do a non-camp Eurovision. You can just imagine what this is going to be like.
Are there any countries that aren't taking part in Eurovision?
The thing is, it's a big world. And Sergei Lavrov, Russia's foreign minister, has claimed
Central Asian republics.
Well, yeah, he has claimed that at least 25 other countries want into this. I mean, we are taking Sergei Lavrov's word for anything here, and we don't know what time of day or how shortly after lunch he was asked this question. But including, he says, some in Latin America, so I assume Nicaragua and Venezuela?
Well, they seem to claim that Brazil, Cuba, India and China would possibly want to join. And I can't imagine that you could completely control everything, the Brazilian entry that is going to be absolutely acceptable to Putin. I mean, it may get nul point from, or whatever the Russian for nul point is, in the voting.
That does make me think the music might be better standards if we're getting...
I'm sceptical. Terry, just as a final thought on this, as a soft power outreach, which is clearly intended to be, is it going to impress anybody? Will people think differently about Russia than they have spent the last 3 years thinking?
Well, no, absolutely not. I mean, I imagine if you asked, any Ukrainians or anybody else what they thought of it, they would not find it, entertaining at all.
I suspect Ukraine will not be sending an entry.
I suspect they would not be, voluntarily joining the competition. So, I think if you have to create something like this, and try so hard to recreate your own version of it, I think it's, probably not going to work. And they have announced this before 10 years ago, and it still hasn't happened.
Well, to France now, where one agency of the state does seem perversely keen to tee the world up for any number of cheap jokes invoking much cherished stereotypes. We at this August symposium will of course be rising heroically above all such temptations. It has emerged that the French government's Ecological Transition Agency has felt it necessary to instruct citizens in optimum clothes washing frequency, urging a daily change of underwear but suggesting that t-shirts can go 5 days between washes and jeans an entire month. Would anybody, in fact, like to take any cheap shots at our friends across the channel or not?
Can I just say...
Go on.
British people, when they were asked about this, half of single men only wash their bedding every 4 months.
Well, I think I
think we should be just careful before
when you specify single men that is a self-answering question right there.
I think about another 12% only wash them as and when needed, which could likely be more than 4 months. So I think I think the French have been outraged about this, but I do wonder if people's secret washing is as frequent as is thought. So I've got this theory that other people do their washing and ironing, for example, teenage children, put the clothing in the laundry basket more often than people who actually do their own laundry. What do you reckon?
Are you suggesting that teenagers are actually disproportionately hygienic when compared to the median population?
I think they are when someone else is doing their laundry, yeah.
Okay.
My son's floor says otherwise.
It sounds like you are speaking from weary experience there.
No. But I've got.
Terry, 5 days for a T-shirt?
The one that really upset me was the one that said, wear your gym kit 3 times after you've been to the gym. Now, I had it not personally addressed to me. There was an email from my gym recently saying sort of class etiquette, please observe good hygiene. And I don't know if they'd seen this, but, the idea that someone would come into the gym having done a really sweaty workout and wear that same kit 3 times. I don't care about the environment. You need to wash your gym
especially
kit.
If they're getting the metro home.
Exactly.
I mean, that is quite antisocial.
Does it not depend on how stinky a person is, though, and what they do?
Depends on maybe what your workout is.
If you're sitting working at your desk at home,
no, but your gym kit,
then your t-shirts maybe why not 45 days? Because you're not it's not disturbing anymore. But gym, if you've been really working out, that's unpleasant,
grim, isn't it? I mean, behold, though, as I seamlessly weave an actual news hook into this, Kate, France actually did pass a budget today. So should the government keep funding this?
What, this agency?
Or this initiative to tell French people how often to wash their clothes?
I think it's a bit weird for the state to tell people, but I do wonder, because people don't know stuff, do they? So, for example, you'd think a quick laundry would be better environmentally than a long one, but actually the slow and cold is better for your clothes and the environment than hot and fast, for example. No, did you know that, Andrew?
I did know that because I am an insufferable nerd. I also, at least I have read that apparently using your dishwasher, which is a whole other can of worms, actually consumes less water and is generally better all round than doing it in the sink. But Terry, where are we here on that balance between helpful nudging from the government and insufferable nanny state hectoring?
I think there is helpful nudging. I think people don't like to be told, exactly how often they should wash, but you can couch that usually in a better way. I mean, I remember the French were very good about telling people how to behave in hot weather, when they had the big heat waves, and it was, go and stand in the cold aisles of supermarkets, which sounded like a really silly thing for the government to be telling people to do, but it actually worked. But maybe telling people how they could save water, how they could save energy, particularly in places where there are water shortages sometimes in the summer, may not be an entirely bad thing.
Terry Stiastny and Kate Clark, thank you both for joining us. Finally, on today's show, the Japan Foundation Touring Film Programme kicks off this Friday. As the title suggests, the annual festival wanders venues across the UK from Plymouth to Orkney, showcasing the best of Japanese cinema. Monocle's Lily Austin spoke with Junko Takekawa, the festival's founder and Senior Arts Programme Officer, to find out more.
おきみちゃんは自ら女の幸せを捨てようって言うんですよ。
私は今日まで清廉潔白であろうと生きてきた。だがそれは正しかったのであろうか。なんだその目は。
Japan Foundation Touring Film Program was established in 2004 in order to give the opportunity to expand the knowledge of the Japanese cinema. We started off with 3 venues in the UK, but ever since that, it has grown strength by strength, and it's now we have 33 venues in the UK for the 25th version.
And obviously we have many film festivals here in the UK. Why was it important for it to be a touring film festival?
Yes, the idea of this kind of program was from the beginning to give some more opportunity to people outside to enjoy or appreciate Japanese cinema, because back then there was, of course, still is, London Film Festival, other festival there, but hardly any Japanese films were screened. And if they were screened, it's quite sort of limited. I wouldn't say expanded ever since, but, compared with people in London, where the people can enjoy the variety of the events associated with Japan, people in outside, London may be deprived of such opportunity. So, from the beginning, our idea was to give opportunity to the people outside London. We didn't, therefore, have London venue when we started having this. But later, London was added on. So it was actually meant to be for non-London people.
And in the 21 years that you've been running the programme, has it changed a lot? And has the audience changed as you've developed the programme?
In terms of structure, it has been always thematic. And also, I tried to put the mixture of that films, such as old film and anime and then contemporary release. But one thing is common is hardly ever be screened in this country, those films that we are showing. Audience-wise, of course, it's massively expanded as time goes by, of course, nonetheless. That's because screen numbers went up, venue shot up. Given that this year we got over 260 screenings during the 2 months' time from the February, March, you can imagine that compared with the starting time, 2004, of course, it's massively changed.
And in terms of, you mentioned there being a theme each year. This year's theme is justice, justification and judgment in Japanese cinema. Those are quite punchy words. What made you choose that theme and what's its relevance?
Punchy, isn't it? Of course, they're kind of, wordplay, of course, nonetheless. But apart from that, I thought that it's very timely when we are living in an ever-changing world. I'm not going to the very political. That's certainly that moral or social norm has been shifting. There is a lot of people who are falling through the safety net. That feeling justice or having a justice is, I thought that was a fundamental principle of the human beings to feel happy. Given that all sort of situation around us, I thought this is a very good theme for this year's touring film program.
I definitely saw that. I was lucky enough to watch a couple of the films that you're screening, and A Girl Named Anne definitely has that kind of quality to it.
Indeed, yes.
The other film I watched was Bushido, and this is a historical drama. A Girl Named Anne is a bit more social realist and set during COVID. Yes. So obviously, as you kind of mentioned before, very, very different genres. What is the selection process for you choosing these films?
Well, of course, it has to be intuitive, and it got to be very resourceful. I normally watch around 70, 80 films.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a really tough job, to be honest. And then, tenaciously making notes, then checking against that. Of course, balance between that films are also important. If you actually put together all similar sort of films, you may actually ended up, eliminating certain sort of people who had different taste. So under the same theme, I try to mix from different kind of categories. For example, Bushido is certainly period drama, but yet made by that contemporary director, which is very interesting, sales point as well. And then Girls Named Anne, for example, is a very social, as you say, and also that's depicting that social sort of situation around that unfortunate girls, named Anne. And particularly picking up the situation of what happened during the COVID lockdown period. Course, nonetheless, it's very timely. I take that to sort of an example from the program, but there's other, selection like very fun film, also that other classic films who never been screened in this country, or all sort of a mixture, so that from the younger audience to the senior audience, or the family friendly, and also that those socially conscious person, all of them can enjoy. That's my actually fundamental way of selecting. Now, I wouldn't choose the film from that theme only, just in the variety of genre. But of course, most important thing is quality. I really check very thoroughly that how those films were received in Japan, internationally, whether they have been screened, if not UK, outside Japan. Then that kind of sort of research I do. In addition to, I actually watch those films and then see to it.
Well, I think you've done an incredible job. It really does show the breadth of Japanese cinema that there is, which I feel like often a lot of UK viewers wouldn't necessarily know.
Exactly, yes.
Just finally, it must be very difficult to choose, and you've already gone through this very difficult selection process, but if you could just pick one film that you'd recommend to someone who hasn't seen any Japanese cinema before, which film from the programme would you suggest?
Probably I'll choose The Tea Friends. This is a very unique film about that old people who into prostitution in Japan. It's you have probably watched some other films where that young girls in Japan go into the prostitution. However, you never seen that old retired people who want to have a sexual relationship. Also, that's feeling that's a missing part in their lives, and then prostitution is used to cover these missing sort of, feeling into it. There's a few sort of, social films, even in Japan, who capture that aging, aging society. But this is really different. The story was based on real story. So by watching it, that you see what's happening in Japan in the current time.
That was Junko Takakawa, tour programmer of the Japan Foundation Touring Film Programme, speaking to Monocle's Lily Austin. The programme starts this Friday. To find out more, go to jpf-film.org.uk. That is it for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Terry Stiastny and Kate Clark. Today's show was produced by Monica Lillis and researched by Maisie Ringer. Our sound engineer was Elliot Greenfield. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.